Absolutely, fundamentally agree, and I also think that you look at some of the largest institutions out there now, they will only invest if they get what they consider the necessary transparency, which, as we've already said, doesn't have to be a full portfolio listing. It just needs to be an understanding that says, from their perspective, how do they get the necessary overview as to what is happening in that managed account? How do they, in that investment? How do they ensure that they have a certain level of comfort that their money is being invested wisely, that it's been invested in what they thought they were buying? And it goes to another point that's been raised, and I think it was in the survey as well. It's understanding the full life cycle, the full control environment around an investment, not just what that position holds. The procedures of the administrator, the procedures of the prime brokers, the credit exposure that you're taking on, the structural exposure that you're taking on. And as for fund of funds, again, huge advancements have been made to offer reporting to investors that provide that level of transparency, whether it be a return volatility sort of analysis, whether it's by style, by geography, etc. This is all occurring today. So absolutely, fundamentally agree with David. This is what is happening today, and it's an absolute must.
Simon, not to pile on, but just to continue with that, I mean, we would argue that the industry really faces a restless, empowered investor base. We refer to this as the era of the investor. So we believe that the hedge fund industry in general has been very responsive to this, and that has flows through also the administrators as well. We have an annual CFO forum we do every year with our hedge fund clients, and we asked them what their greatest challenge was in satisfying investors. They came back with providing adequate risk data. So they definitely are feeling the weight and the urgency associated with investor demands, as well as now regulatory demands as well.
Okay.
One thing I would echo on Steve's point, what did come through loud and clear from our CFOs is that they believe that, to your point about the overall control process, that's at the administrator, but also at the advisor, the manager, the whole trade process from decision through the trade execution, through settlement. That's what the CFOs believe, frankly, is something that should be an area of focus. And that getting investors comfortable with that control process, they think is very significant.
Okay.
I think going back, historically, have funds managers actually done their job properly. I remember having a meeting with the managing side of Permal, which ran Houseman. And one of Houseman's 5 things that they did before they met a manager was to find out how much money the manager had in his own fund and how much did it represent in terms of his own net worth. And if they hadn't got it, they wouldn't invest with them. So I think, and I'm not sure they were unique, they may not have done it quite like that, but the point I'm trying to make is that, as David said, proper responsible managers have been doing most of what's being asked for now for years.
Just to give you an example on that particular point, one used to be able to check, certainly for a US manager, what they were telling you about what we call co-investment, their investment fund, because of the deferral system in the US, the tax system, where the deferral sits as a liability in the financial statements. The deferral system, as some of you may know, has now ended, or in the form it was in anyway, and therefore people can't make that check anymore, and many managers, not all, but many, are happy for the administrator to confirm that amount independently once a year to investors.
Can I go to a question that's been emailed in? Someone's asked, how much has the measures you've taken to increase transparency and sort of truncating this increased your costs?
Well, I mean, there is a cost, of course, in doing this, but ultimately that has to be factored into what you as a fund investor and what the ultimate investor is looking to do, and that's achieve the necessary level of comfort that your money has been spent wisely. It's not free. It certainly isn't free. A lot of money has been spent in technology, both capturing data, both analysing data, and both communicating it to clients. As well, of course, it's back to that point. You get data in, you have to have the right skill set of person to be able to understand what that data is saying, to be able to challenge, to question, talk with an investment manager to understand exactly why the data that you're receiving doesn't marry up to what he or she is telling you. So yes, it does. There is a cost impact, but it is often.
Can you give me an indication? Can you give the audience an indication of what it is?
That's very, very difficult to do.
An estimate.
No, I mean, again, it's
significant. How about that?
Well, that I think is the drive. I think there was that question may have come from a manager who's, I suppose you could say it's a sign of the times. I don't think even 18 months ago, when we were in the shock stage of the post-credit crunch crisis, people would have asked that question. People think things have maybe slowed down a bit. There's a lot more questions coming in that I need to go to. I'm conscious of the time. But anybody else want to quickly answer that one?
Well, I think one area that...
Have you increased your cost because of all these people who come to see you, these investors? And
well, naturally. I mean, if people come in the door, you've got to talk to them, you're not doing something else, so you're work time. But one area that I think has been a sort of shadow area, which has been the verification of assets where they need to be verified. And again, going back to Madoff and Petters, I don't think anybody did do that, otherwise they realised there weren't any assets to verify. On the whole, if you've got a big prime broker and you've got a manager and they're not linked in any way, there's no unhealthy relationship as in Madoff, you can probably accept that if you do a couple of checks, that's all right. But where you've got to go in and find out whether loans have been paid back and not disclosed, it does take time and accounting.
If I can really quickly, there's definitely a cost associated with it, and we would view it as more of an investment, because I think from the administrator's perspective, I think the administration role is viewed a little bit differently, and therefore not a commoditized type service. So I think from our perspective, there's cost, but we would view it as more of an investment from that perspective.
There's a couple more questions that have come in I'd like to go to, if I may. There's a question here from somebody, I think, should total transparency be given on side pockets, even if the fund's policy is not to give the transparency on the fund's normal holdings?
Well, I think it's consistency, right? If the fund, you should always provide transparency. This particular fund might not give transparency, and therefore you won't get the side pocket. But if any holding of a fund should be made available to someone who is requesting it, if that's the policy of the manager. So you can't provide, I guess the point I'm making, you can't provide transparency on all the holdings except for the side pocket. You know, it's in a side pocket for a reason. They're the ones you really want to look at.
Any other comments?
Well, to be honest, we wouldn't invest in a fund that didn't provide periodic portfolio transparency. But philosophically, managers should be less nervous about providing transparency on a side pocket than on other investments, because almost by definition it's a long drawn out situation where the investment is sitting there, and there should be less sensitivity about what percentage share they're in. It's not readily tradable. So philosophically, managers should actually be more prepared to disclose others than other things. But I agree with the point that in the modern world, I think managers are expected to provide transparency on the lot.
I'm going to move on very quickly because there's more questions. This always happens towards the end. The questions start coming in, people start thinking of things. Another question, what percentage of the portfolio for a fund of funds, this is for you two fund of fund managers, does the panel think is the minimum that should be disclosed to investors? I think it's a very good question. Whoever asked it, thank you.
Well, my answer is very simple, 100%.
100%? Well, I don't think many people do that.
Well, no, it is 100%, but it's back to the point. What are you disclosing? It's not 100% of all the underlying investments that are held by the funds that you've invested into.
I would make one caveat to that, which is the point I made earlier on about, to the investor who's invested in the fund. I think they have, obviously, I think why should they invest without having that? I think the public dissemination of that is a bit more an issue for the reasons I described earlier on.
I don't disagree with you now, David, but I think there's a lot of fund managers that do not give 100% transparency on their underlying managers they're invested in.
I can't speak for other managers, but any investor in our product would get that.
Can't speak for other fund of funds, but if you're investing in a fund of fund, you should have the right to know what you're invested into at the fund.
Clearly, our only sensitivity would be if someone then, published that on because I think that is
if you have an NDA,
proprietary and sensitive. I think more generally, actually, this isn't just a fund of hedge fund point, this is a general point. There is a quid pro quo for investors. They have every right to ask for reasonably sensitive details. If, as a group of people, we end up leaking sensitive things, embarrassing managers deliberately, releasing the whole portfolio to the Wall Street Journal or something, that is not going to be helpful. So investors deserve to have transparency, but the managers deserve some civilised treatment of that information.
One more question, and I think we'll go back to our chat because we haven't got much longer left, but this is, I think, quite an interesting question, particularly for you, Steve, given what you do. Re-managed accounts, should brokerage and other fees be disclosed? Brackets, most investors are only told that the rates are, quote, in line with industry practice, unquote. For example, soft dollars used to pay for computers, research reports, etc. may be used from higher than normal brokerage charged to the fund manager. In such cases, the investor is actually paying for these expenses and not knowing it.
It's a very good question, and someone that obviously knows the detail extremely well. First of all, with any managed account platform or product that you're investing into, you should know the transparency through that cost structure. There are many examples where it is difficult to understand and see that transparency through. Some charges may not always be readily collatable and upfront be able to communicate, but you should be able. There should be enough information to be able to give you a very good sense as to what is available. But the question is valid. You need a managed account structure that is transparent in its cost structure, which, as we've been getting to when we're talking about transparency, goes to cost as well.
Yeah. To the extent they're a U.S. manager and they're registered with the SEC, they have to disclose their soft dollar usage and their practices in their public disclosure documents.
Yeah, and good managed account practices would make sure that only reasonable costs are incurred by the managed account anyway, as opposed to things that shouldn't be charged back or that should be incurred by the manager, and or things that shouldn't be occurring anyway.
Right. Okay, in the few minutes we have remaining, I think we'll thank you for those questions, everybody. I'd like to quickly come back to, if we can in a few minutes, ask you all what practical things in realistic terms that's not being done today, if anything, that could be done in the next 2 or 3 years to help investors in terms of transparency and gain more transparency on a regular basis.
Well, I guess I would say that, frankly, for us, we're going to continue to focus on is making the data we have available as accessible as possible, and to the extent, again, pursuant to the manager's request, making that available to investors in a very easy fashion. So through a password-protected, encrypted investor portal, for example. So I think it's basically, from our perspective, administration perspective, it's really facilitating and enabling the manager to be as responsive as possible to their investors.
Right.
Yeah, I think you start with the investor. You understand what the investor's needs are from a transparency reporting perspective. They should be very much aligned with what you are looking at, particularly in the fund-of-fund world. Then a mechanism for communicating that. And then it drills all the way down, and it's back to one of the points you made about the administrator. It is ensuring the administrator, being such a key part of that communication chain, needs to be able to capture it and funnel it through to a party that needs to be able to again capture it, analyse it, and put it in a readily available format out to investors. Thankfully, Man's already got that, so that's good.
David, before you say anything, somebody's come back to dispute, I think, what you were saying. So perhaps we haven't got much time, but someone said, well, fund of funds weren't disclosing who when they were invested in Madoff. So there's a bit of selective disclosure there in some cases.
I was very careful what I said. We were not invested in Madoff at any time, but I'm very careful what I said. I cannot speak for the whole industry. All I can say is that we, and I think most sensible funds of funds, would give full portfolio transparency to an investor in one of our funds.
Right.
I don't see how you can operate without.
I agree with you, but there are many people that don't.
I would also suggest that many investors who went to those funds are investing in Madoff because they're investing in Madoff, and they've been told to do it at the gold club.
Sorry,
we always need discussions to get on to Madoff in the end.
I know, let's not do Madoff.
Madoff is very interesting.
Yes.
In that, I think most investors who were invested in Madoff knew they were in Madoff.
That's a great
I don't think there's a lot. I mean, there may be some people who had a personal experience where they didn't realise that a fund of hedge funds had one line that wasn't Madoff. But I think most investors were very aware of what was in Madoff. I think the problem was the due diligence that was performed on Madoff and the structures that surrounded Madoff. Some of which were managed accounts, of course.
So I sort of took you off what perhaps you were going to say in terms of what, if anything, in terms of practical steps, what more should be done in the foreseeable future.
I think the general dynamic, I think, will remain the same, in that there will be a healthy dialogue between managers and investors. I think what will be interesting is the kinds of initiatives we're seeing from administrators and from some managers may become a little bit more. I mean, there have been attempts to do this, in various domiciles by managers. They've been fairly half-hearted. It might be interesting to see if managers themselves, or managers and investors together, can reach some kind of industry standard that would save all these sort of bespoke solutions that exist today. I think that, practically speaking, will be a long way off. But I think as the industry matures, that's something maybe both sides of the fence can agree on.
Dermot, from your perspective, do you think?
Well, my perspective, looking from a different point of view, I think that there's probably very few administrators, from the tiniest little person in Appaloosa to the largest names you can think of with American banks, all perfectly happy to give out any information that they can. But they're not going to do it until the investor has agreed with the manager, and all the investors, or the manager has agreed, all the investors should get that. No administrator can afford to stand out there and say, oh, I'll tell them this because I think that's what they should know. It's got to be agreed within the fund and the manager, or the manager can, and the investor first. The administrator can't lead this, but I don't think it's a particular, once we're told, yes, give them full disclosure, it's not very difficult. If you're able to do the NAV, you can give them full disclosure. Now, you may have to write specific reports and that sort of thing, but that's your initial, what Phil was saying, the initial cost of getting it all together. But once you've done that, and you've got the system in there, I'm known in my office because of my extreme lack of technological expertise. It's just a matter of pressing a button.
Lastly, and very quickly, on a sort of broader point to end on, is there anything more with the two administrators here on a more fundamental level? Do you think that there's more aggregation that you administrators can do to help provide, to establish a more direct relationship with investors over and beyond the current way the industry is structured? To repeat, there were some investors who answered this survey who would like a more direct link with the administrator.
Well, we would welcome that. I mean, at the end of the day, I think it comes down to what, investors need to allocate their time from a due diligence perspective. So I think you need to look at the overall risk picture and then allocate time accordingly. So, we have continued to engage with investors and would welcome more of that. And obviously, again, I think we certainly view our hedge fund managers as important clients. So obviously, in conjunction with their efforts as well.
All right. Anything else you want to say on that one, Tom?
No, I agree. I think that subject only to us being allowed to do it. What information are we supposed to give them? Once we've found that out, then we accept investors into the office quite willingly. We give them a sandwich and a cup of coffee, and not much more. We will disclose anything we're able to disclose. I think it'd be much easier and much more healthy to be able to disclose everything.